Elmwood Lane was the kind of street that could lull a person into forgetting the world's problems. Neatly trimmed hedges lined the sidewalks, and American flags fluttered gently in the breeze. It was a peaceful July afternoon, warm, not hot, breezy, not windy, and quiet, but never lonely. Karen Mills sat at her living room window with a glass of iced tea, sweating beside her laptop. She worked from home as a graphic designer, but her eyes kept drifting outside where her golden retriever, Max, was sprawled belly up in the sun. His fur shimmered like wheat under the light, and every now and then he kicked a lazy paw into the air, chasing some invisible dream. Across the street, Mrs. Hernandez swept her porch, while the Johnson twins rode their scooters in looping figure eights on the pavement. A sprinkler hissed in the neighboring yard, catching the light in a spray of tiny rainbows. Everything was as it should be, or so it seemed. The sound came so suddenly, Karen nearly knocked over her glass. At first, it was just a bark, then another. But it quickly turned into something else, something jagged and raw. A scream, not human, but still undeniably a cry for help. Karen shot up from her chair, nearly tripping over the rug as she rushed to the door. The second she opened it, the sound intensified, clearer now. A panicked howl that twisted her stomach into a knot. She saw Max. He was no longer lounging. He was running, fast and erratic, zigzagging across the lawn like something was attacking him. His golden fur looked darker, moving, writhing. What the? Karen stepped onto the porch and immediately gasped. Max was covered in bees. Black, pulsing cloud of them clung to his back, legs, even his face. His eyes were wide with terror, his mouth open in a constant, agonized howl. He rolled, snapped at the air, pawed at his ears, but the swarm only grew thicker. Karen bolted down the steps. Max! She made it halfway across the lawn before the first ting hit her cheek, then another on her forearm. The pain was sharp, hot, and immediate. She screamed and stumbled backward, swatting the air. The bees turned on her in a flash, tiny missiles with wings. A man shouted from the sidewalk, "Get inside! You're making it worse." Karen, panicking, turned and ran back to the house. She slammed the door shut, her breath coming in fast, uneven bursts. She looked out through the window, eyes burning. Max was still outside, now rolling on the pavement, yelping, while the bees clung on with terrible fury. Neighbors were gathering at a safe distance. Phones came out, some filmed. Others shouted suggestions. Use a hose. Call animal control. Does anyone have an EpiPen? But no one moved closer. The swarm had taken over the airspace like a living storm cloud. It was too dangerous. Karen's hands trembled as she dialed 911. Her voice cracked. My dog, he's being attacked by bees. Please. Someone needs to help him, The dispatcher was calm. She assured Karen help was on the way, but that didn't matter. Max was out there now, screaming in pain, lungs likely full of stings. Every second counted. Karen dropped the phone. She was about to try again, damn the pain, when something caught her eye through the window. Across the street, on the shaded porch of the oldest house on Elmwood Lane, an old man stood up. Walter Jenkins. No one really knew him. He'd lived there for years, always alone. Didn't come to block parties. Never gave out candy at Halloween. Most people thought he was either deaf, unfriendly, or both. But right now, Walter wasn't sitting like usual. He was walking slowly, but with purpose down his porch steps. He didn't flinch at the commotion. He didn't seem afraid. In one hand, he carried a dented metal bucket. In the other, a box and what looked like a thick towel. He was heading straight toward the swarm. And suddenly, for the first time all day, everyone stopped talking. Max's cries had become hoarse. his body jerking in spasms across the street as the bees clung like a dark veil over him. The sound of his agony made Karen want to rip her hair out. Her dog wasn't just in pain, he was terrified, suffocating in a storm of stingers. And there was nothing she could do. The neighborhood had turned into a scene from a surreal nightmare. The Johnson twins had dropped their scooters and were now crying beside their mother, who held them back behind a parked SUV. Mr. Carver, who ran a pest control business, had thrown on gloves and tried approaching with a thick comforter. But the moment he got within 10 feet, the bees swarmed him. He dropped the blanket and ran, flailing wildly as stings peppered his arms. The swarm was angry, disoriented, and massive. "Somebody get water," shouted a teenage boy with a garden hose, but the stream didn't reach far enough. The bees only danced through it and regrouped. Max let out another whimpering cry and collapsed completely. His body twitched, legs kicking weakly. His fur rippled under the crawling insects. Karen pressed her hands against the glass door, sobbing, "Please, somebody do something." But nobody did. Everyone was frozen, helpless, scared. Then came the sound, faint at first, but deliberate. The slow, hollow thud of a cane on concrete. Walter Jenkins was moving. People turned to look. He crossed the street with the slow, deliberate rhythm of someone who had all the time in the world, even though everything around him screamed hurry. He wore worn-out overalls and a faded green shirt. His white hair was tucked under an old cap. The bucket in his right hand let off a faint trail of smoke. His left arm cradled a small wooden box and a towel. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't shouting orders. He simply walked forward while everyone else stayed back. Karen opened her front door a crack and called out, "Please don't go near them. They'll sting you." Walter didn't answer. His face was unreadable, his eyes sharp and focused, not in a heroic way, but like a man tuning into a sound no one else could hear. As he got closer to Max, something strange began to happen. The bees didn't scatter or charge him like they had with everyone else. They buzzed, yes, but slower now, almost confused by his presence. Walter set the bucket on the ground, crouched beside it, and adjusted something inside. A small puff of pine smoke rolled out. It drifted lazily through the air, curling around the swarm like ghost fingers. Then, gently, he reached for Max. Gasps rang out. "Is he crazy? He's gonna get stung to death." But Walter didn't flinch. He moved. With such calm precision, it was like he had done this 1,000 times. And maybe, just maybe, he had. He waved the smoke in controlled motions over Max's body, letting it saturate the air. The bees started to thin. Some took off, spiraling into the sky. Others fell away from the dog's body as if lulled by the smoke's soft lullaby. Karen stumbled down her steps, heart hammering in her throat. What is he doing? Is that a bee smoker?" Someone asked from the crowd. Walter didn't look up. He simply laid the towel across Max, speaking softly to the trembling dog beneath it. "You're all right now, boy. Just breath in. Too fast, that's all. Let him leave you be." With his other hand, he opened the small wooden box. Inside were what looked like strips of dry burlap and more pine needles, smoldering gently, feeding the soft smoke. Bit by bit, the swarm began to dissipate. People couldn't believe what they were seeing. The same man who never waved, never smiled, was now coaxing a furious swarm away from a dying dog like some kind of insect whisperer. A small child whispered to her father, "Is he magic?" Walter leaned down and lifted Max, now barely conscious, into his arms. His voice was quiet, but strong. "He's gonna need help fast. Somebody call a vet." And just like that, he turned dog in arms, bees no longer a threat, and began walking back toward the sidewalk. Everyone stood frozen. No one, not even Karen, had known. But this old man, newbies, asterisk. Walter Jenkins cradled Max in his arms, like a wounded soldier from a battlefield long past. The golden retriever's breathing was shallow, his muzzle twitching with residual pain. A few bees still crawled along his fur, but most had vanished. Into the summer air, their fury doused by Walter's calm and smoke. Karen rushed toward him, trembling. "Is he alive?" Walter paused. His eyes blue, clear, and startlingly sharp for a man of nearly 80 met hers. "He's alive," he said simply. "But he needs a vet, soon." Without hesitation, Karen took Max from him, her arms trembling not just from the weight, but the shock of what she just witnessed. "Thank you." How did you know how to do that?" Walter didn't answer. Right away. He brushed a bee from his sleeve and turned toward his porch. "I used to keep bees," he said over his shoulder. "Long time ago." Then he walked away. The crowd stood silent, still trying to make sense of what they'd just seen. The Johnson twins' mother muttered, "Was that even safe?" Someone else whispered, "That dog would have died if he hadn't." Stepped in. Mr. Carver, the pest control guy, approached slowly, shaking his head in awe. "I've never seen bees back off like that. Not mid-swarm. That wasn't just beekeeper knowledge. That was something else." Karen didn't wait to debate. She called her sister to drive her and Max to the emergency vet clinic across town. As they pulled away, Karen looked back through the window of the car. Walter had returned to his porch, seated in the same weathered rocking chair, sipping what looked like coffee. As if nothing had happened, the vet's office was a blur. Max had dozens of stings, but thankfully none in his throat or lungs. The vet gave him antihistamines, fluids, and monitored him for anaphylaxis. "It's bad," she said, "but he's lucky, very lucky. If you'd waited even 5 more minutes." Karen didn't need the rest of the sentence. She knew Max was going to live, but only because of that old man. That night, as she sat beside her groggy, sleeping dog, Karen's mind was racing. Who was Walter Jenkins? He'd lived across the street since she moved into her house 3 years ago. She'd seen him countless times watering his plants, taking short walks with his cane, always alone. She'd never once seen him at a neighborhood event, never spoken to him. To be honest, she'd never even really considered him anything more than the quiet guy in the mossy house with the peeling paint. But now she couldn't stop thinking about the quiet confidence in his steps, the way the bees had seemed to obey him, the mystery in those calm eyes. She pulled out her phone and opened the neighborhood Facebook group. A video someone had taken during the incident was already going viral. The caption read, "Our own Mr. Miyagi, local dog saved by mysterious beekeeper neighbor." Hundreds of comments poured in. Who is this guy? Is he a vet? A bee scientist? My grandma says he used to be a farmer or something. Whatever he is, he's a damn hero. Karen read them all, then typed slowly into the comment box. His name is Walter Jenkins. He lives across from me. We owe him more than we realize. Then, after a moment, she added, I'm bringing him a pie tomorrow. It's time we all got to know the man behind the bees. She hit post and sat back, thinking. The neighborhood had lived with a mystery for years. Not a ghost, not a rumor, just a man, quiet and ordinary in the way trees are ordinary. But now, they all knew. Walter Jenkins was not just the quiet guy across the street. He was a man with history in his hands. And today, he had saved a life. Asterisk the next morning, the world had reset itself, as if nothing had happened. Birds chirped over Elmwood Lane. Sprinklers clicked rhythmically. A postal worker rolled along on his cart, earbuds in, oblivious to the neighborhood's buzzing curiosity. But for Karen Mills, everything had changed. Max was resting in her bedroom, sedated and sore but healing. Every time she looked at him, she saw not just her beloved dog, but the man who had stepped through a storm of stingers without hesitation, not for fame, not for thanks, just because it needed to be done. She stood at her kitchen counter, smoothing foil over a still warm cherry pie. The crust was golden and flaked at the edges. Her mother's recipe, the one she only used on holidays or when she really wanted to impress someone. She added a handwritten note. For Mr. Jenkins, thank you for saving my best friend, Corinne. And Max, box in hand, she crossed the street. Walter's front yard was neatly overgrown, the grass always 2 weeks late for mowing. She hesitated before knocking. No doorbell. Just a brass lion knocker that hadn't been touched in years. Knock, dash knock, dash knock, dash knock, nothing. She waited. Birds chirped. A wind chime jangled lazily. Then, just as she was about to turn away, the door creaked open. Walter stood there in a faded gray shirt, suspenders over his shoulders, and socks without shoes. His face was unreadable, but his eyes softened when he saw the pie. I wanted to thank you, Corinne said, suddenly feeling like a child before a grandparent. You saved Max's life. I really don't know what we would have done without you. Walter looked down at the pie, then up at her. Cherry? Yes, sir. He gave a short nod. You'd better come in then. Corinne followed him inside. The air smelled of cedar, tobacco, and something faintly sweet like honey warming in the sun. The house was dim, but not in a sad way. It was the kind of place where time didn't bother knocking. Walter set the pie down on a small kitchen table, cluttered with old envelopes, bird books, and an antique oil lamp. Corinne glanced around and saw something that made her pause. The walls were covered in photographs, dozens of them. Black and white, sepia, some with frayed edges. Most were of bees. One photo showed Walter much younger, dressed in a full beekeeper's suit, standing beside rows of white hives in a wildflower field. Another had him shaking hands with a man in a military uniform. A third showed a group of schoolchildren holding jars of honey, beaming with joy. Corinne turned. You were a beekeeper? Walter nodded as he sat. 42 years. Started in Georgia. Ended up here after my wife passed. Didn't see the point in buzzing around anymore. His voice was rough, but steady. Like gravel, it had been smoothed by decades of wind. Corinne sat across from him. But yesterday, you just walked into that swarm like it was nothing. How did you know what to do? Walter scratched his chin. Bees aren't out to hurt anything. They only attack when they feel trapped, cornered. That swarm? Probably from a collapsed hive. Lost their queen. Lost their direction. Just like people, sometimes. He sipped coffee from an old ceramic mug that read, Be kind. Corinne smiled. You're like a bee whisperer. Walter chuckled. Nah, just listened long enough to learn their language. He stood slowly, motioning her toward a bookshelf. Come, let me show you something. He pulled down a leather-bound album and opened it to a page filled with newspaper clippings. Local veteran builds beekeeping school for troubled youth. Walter Jenkins, honored for saving 7 from hive collapse. Retired beekeeper donates final harvest to Children's Hospital. Corinne stared, stunned. The man the neighborhood had written off as a recluse had been someone with someone. A teacher. A rescuer. A quiet kind of legend. And he'd chosen to live here, unnoticed, in the background. You've done a lot, Corinne whispered. Walter looked at her, eyes kind and weathered. Most of the good in the world is done quietly, miss. Corinne felt her throat tighten. She suddenly understood. He hadn't just saved Max. He'd reminded her that heroes didn't always come with capes. Sometimes they came with smoke, stories, and a cherry pie. By the following weekend, The story of Walter Jenkins had spread beyond Elmwood Lane. The video of him walking through the swarm had crossed over to local news and was now being shared with captions like "Bee Whisperer Saves Dog with Smoke and Calm," and "Elderly Hero of the Hive." Some reporters had knocked on his door, but Walter, true to form, declined every request with a polite shake of the head and a simple, "I already did my talking." But something had shifted. People began to see Walter differently. More than that, they began to see him at all. When Karen returned his pie plate, still warm from being rinsed, she brought her niece along. The young girl, Lily, had clung to her hand on the way up the porch, shy but curious. Walter opened the door, saw the child hiding behind Karen's leg, and gave a little smile. "This your shadow? She's a bit curious about the bee man," Karen said with a grin. Walter knelt slightly, his knees cracking with age. "Well, I reckon that's better than being scared of him. You like honey, young lady?" Lily nodded quickly. "And you already like bees more than most people." He invited them into the backyard. Karen was surprised. This was a part of Walter's life she hadn't seen yet. The yard was sprawling, ringed with low trees, with patches of clover and tall sunflowers. But at the very back sat 5 wooden hives, stacked neatly like weathered books. A soft hum filled the air, not dangerous, not loud, just a constant, low vibration, as if the air was alive. Walter led them closer. Lily froze. "They won't hurt you," he said gently. "See how calm they are? Means the queen's strong. The colony's healthy." Lily whispered, "Do they know you?" Walter chuckled. "They know calm. Bees can feel panic like heat off a skillet. But if you stay steady, they'll stay steady." Karen knelt next to her niece. "Go on, sweetie. Just stay still." Walter pulled a honeycomb frame from one of the hives with smooth, practiced hands. It glowed gold in the sun, thick with honey. Bees crawled across it, busy and unconcerned. Karen watched Lily's eyes widen as Walter handed her a sealed jar. "This one's from last harvest, yours to take home." Lily clutched it like treasure. "Thank you, Mr. Walter." He nodded once, quietly pleased. That afternoon set off a ripple. Word spread that Walter still kept hives, and suddenly kids wanted to see. Parents asked if their children could learn. At first, Walter was reluctant, waving off the attention. "I ain't no teacher anymore," he said. But eventually, the kids wore him down. So did Karen. Within 2 weeks, Walter had 10 children. In his backyard, seated on milk crates and overturned buckets, learning the parts of a hive. He called them the Bee Club. They wore oversized hats and veils, borrowed from a dusty shed where Walter had stored his old equipment for decades. Taught them the calm way to approach a hive, the rhythm of colony life. The dance bees used to tell one another where flowers were blooming. And the children, who once feared insects and screamed at yellow jackets, began to move like little apprentices, respectful, calm, eager for the first time in years. Walter seemed to stand straighter. There was purpose in his walk again. His voice, though quiet, held something new when he spoke to the kids. Karen often stood at the back, watching. It was more than a club, more than a summer hobby. It was a man passing down a lifetime of wisdom to the next generation. One Saturday, while watching the kids dip their fingers in fresh honeycomb, Karen said, "You're building something here." Walter didn't turn. He watched as Lily helped a younger child adjust their bee veil. "Maybe," he said softly, "maybe I'm just remembering how to matter." Karen felt a lump rise in her throat. "You always mattered, Walter." He looked at her, then eyes weathered, grateful, and glinting with something like pride. And from the hives, the soft hum of bees filled the summer air like a song returning home. The Bee Club had become the heartbeat of Elmwood Lane. Every Saturday, Morning, the laughter of children spilled from Walter's backyard, mingling with the hum of the hives and the aroma of warm honey. Parents brought lemonade, folding chairs, and sun hats, turning Walter's once lonely yard into something like a community square. Children who used to be glued to tablets now knew how to tell a drone from a worker bee. Little Lily could recite the life cycle of a queen by heart. And Walter, who had once spoken in short, gravel-toned sentences, now shared stories of bees in war zones, bees in deserts, even bees in the White House garden. But not everyone was thrilled. 3. Houses down, Martin Fuller, president of the HOA and self-declared keeper of order, stood on his porch, arms crossed. He watched the children go in and out of Walter's gate with disapproval written deep into his frown lines. They're going to get stung. Mark my words, he told his wife. She didn't respond. She was too busy watching her own grandson. Ben waved excitedly to Walter as he passed by on his bike. Martin had made his decision. The letter arrived on a Wednesday, typed, formal and cold. Dear Mr. Jenkins, it has come to our attention that your property now hosts multiple active beehives, drawing numerous children weekly. While we acknowledge your contributions, the HOA must uphold community safety standards. As such, we require the immediate removal of all hives by the end of the month. Failure to comply may result in legal action. Sincerely, Martin Fuller, HOA President Walter. Read it once, then twice. His hands trembled not from fear, but from something deeper. A tired kind of anger. The kind a man earns from being ignored. For so long, only to be punished the moment he finds joy again. Karen came over after reading the same letter taped to the community board. This is ridiculous, she snapped. You've brought the neighborhood together. No one's complained except him. Walter sat quietly on his porch, the folded letter in his lap. I've seen this before, he said. Some people only notice the hive when it buzzes too. Loud. Karen crossed her arms. You're not going to just let him shut this down, are you? Walter looked out at his hives. Bees floated lazily above the clover, oblivious to bureaucracy and paper threats. I've fought tougher men than Martin Fuller, he said. But I don't want to make this ugly. Karen had already pulled out her phone. Then I'll do it. What are you doing? Starting a petition, she said. Online and in person. If enough of us speak up, they can't shut you down. Not legally, not morally. Within hours, the neighborhood was buzzing louder than any hive. Parents, who had once barely waved to each other, were now knocking on doors with clipboards. Teenagers posted clips of Walter's teachings under hashtags like #BeStrong and #LetWalterTeach. Local journalists picked up the story again. Veteran beekeeper faces eviction of hives despite saving dog. Teaching kids. Even the mayor's office quietly called, asking for more details. By Sunday, over 400 people had signed, but the battle wasn't over. Martin scheduled a community meeting to formally address the beekeeping issue. It would be held in the school gymnasium neutral territory, but with high enough ceilings to echo anger if needed. Walter didn't want to go. I'm not one for speeches, he told Karen. You don't have to be, she said. You've already spoken louder than any words. Just show up. We'll handle the rest. He hesitated. Then he looked down at the letter once more and slowly folded it in half, placing it in his shirt pocket. I guess if bees can fight for their queen, he said with a soft smile, I can show up for my hive. As the sun dipped behind the trees and the crickets tuned up their nighttime chorus, the neighborhood prepared not for conflict, but for defense, not just of hives. Of something more sacred. The quiet magic of a man who had brought them together one bee at a time. The evening of the community meeting arrived like a brewing storm, clouded with tension and uncertainty, but with the faintest glimmers of hope. Walter stood near the back of the school gymnasium, his hands folded loosely in front of him, the worn leather strap of his army watch catching the flicker of the fluorescent lights. Around him, the room filled quickly with neighbors' friends, strangers, supporters, and skeptics alike. Karen was by his side, offering quiet reassurance with a gentle squeeze of his arm. "You don't have to do this alone," she whispered. Walter gave a small nod. "I'm no stranger to standing up when it counts." The microphone crackled to life as Martin Fuller, the HOA president, stepped up to the podium. His face was tight, his tone clipped. "Good evening, everyone. We're gathered here to discuss the safety concerns surrounding the beekeeping activities on Mr. Jenkins' property. While many appreciate Mr. Jenkins' contributions to our community, the presence of multiple beehives near residential homes raises legitimate worries. We must balance community enrichment with safety." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Karen stepped forward confidently, clutching the petition folder to her chest. "With respect, Martin, Mr. Jenkins has done nothing but enrich this community. The kids who once dreaded bugs now run toward the hives with excitement. He's given them knowledge, courage, and a connection to nature. This isn't just about bees. It's about restoring hope in a world that often forgets kindness." Several neighbors rose in support. One elderly woman spoke of the comfort Walter's stories brought her after her husband's passing. A young father shared how his son, once shy and withdrawn, had blossomed through Walter's gentle guidance. Walter felt the energy shift. It wasn't just about the bees anymore. It was about reclaiming a sense of belonging, of healing wounds that ran deeper than a sting. Then came the opposition. Martin Fuller took the floor again, his voice rising slightly. "I respect what Mr. Jenkins has done, but the risk remains. Allergic reactions, property damage, potential lawsuits, these are not trivial. We must protect the community at large." Walter stepped forward, clearing his throat. His voice was steady but soft. "I've lived long enough to know that fear can close more doors than reason ever will. The bees in my yard don't sting unless provoked. And these children? They've learned respect and calm. They carry that lesson beyond these fences." He glanced around, meeting eyes filled with hope and worry. "I'm not just protecting bees. I'm protecting a piece of this neighborhood's heart." The room fell silent. Then, slowly, applause began. First a few claps, then growing louder, until the gymnasium echoed with it. Martin's expression softened, but he said nothing. Karen smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. After the meeting, Walter walked outside beneath the stars, feeling the weight of the evening settle in his chest. Like a warm blanket. Karen joined him. "You did good," she said. Walter nodded. Sometimes the hardest battles are the quietest ones. Back in his yard, the hive stood serene under the moonlight. The hum of bees seemed to echo a promise that together, a neighborhood could heal. And so, as Walter sat on his porch, watching fireflies dance in the summer air, he felt a deep sense of peace. Not just because the hives were safe, but because a man who had once thought himself forgotten had reminded everyone what it meant to truly matter. The night of the community meeting arrived with a weight in the air, like a storm that hadn't quite committed to raining. Elmwood Elementary's gymnasium buzzed with voices. Folding chairs scraped on the polished floor. A banner for the school's science fair still hung at the back of the room, crooked and faded, almost ironically appropriate. Karen stood near the entrance, greeting neighbors and guiding them toward the petition table. She wore a bright yellow cardigan and a pin that said, "Save the bees, save the man." Walter arrived just before it began, wearing his cleanest shirt and an old Army veteran cap. He walked in alone, but heads turned like dominoes. Children waved from across the gym. Parents nodded. Even the school janitor offered him a fist bump. Up front, Martin Fuller adjusted his tie and cleared his throat at the microphone. We're here tonight to address a matter of growing concern. While we all appreciate Mr. Jenkins' past contributions, the keeping of bees on residential property presents clear risks. Stings, allergies, and property devaluation. These are not minor issues. A few neighbors murmured, but most sat stiffly, waiting for their turn. Karen stood next. With respect, Martin, no one's been hurt. In fact, Mr. Jenkins has prevented harm. Remember the dog covered in bees? That could have ended horribly if not for him. Applause broke out. She held up the petition. Over 500 signatures. Parents, teachers, even a few entomologists. This isn't just about honey. It's about education, kindness, community. One by one, neighbors stood. A mother who'd been shy for years spoke about how her anxious daughter had found confidence through the bee club. A teenage boy shared that Walter's lessons had sparked his plan to pursue environmental science. A grandfather, usually gruff, said simply, "He made us neighbors again." Finally, the mic was offered to Walter. He stepped up slowly, gripping the sides of the podium. His voice, when it came, was soft but clear. "I never meant to stir things up," he began. "I came here to rest, to be quiet. After my wife passed, I stopped keeping bees. Felt like the song had gone out of me." He looked out at the crowd. Then I saw that dog, covered in bees, terrified. And I remembered I still had something to offer. He paused. These children. They reminded me of what I once believed, that even small lives can do great things. Bees, like people, just need a little guidance, a little respect. They're not dangerous unless you treat them like they are. Silence, then slowly applause. It grew louder and louder until the entire gym was on its feet. Even Martin, reluctantly, gave a single clap. 2 days later, the HOA reversed its decision. The hives would stay. No fines. No threats. In fact, the board formally designated Walter's backyard as a community education space. With monthly visits from local science classes, the bee club expanded. Walter even agreed to let one of the older kids, Lily, of course, lead a lesson. He watched from a folding chair, beaming like a proud grandfather. One summer evening, Karen brought over a new pineapple this time and found Walter sitting in the backyard, surrounded by children painting new hive boxes with bright colors, suns, rainbows, flowers, and tiny golden bees. She handed him the pie. "You know," she said, "you might just be the most important person on this street." Walter chuckled, wiping his hands with an old rag. "I'm just the guy with the smoke and the suit," he sighed. "The real magic comes from the hive. You show people what's possible when they work together, and suddenly the world's not so scary anymore." Karen sat beside him, listening to the hum of bees, the laughter of children, and the steady rhythm of a man who'd lived a quiet life, until he chose to matter again. Walter Jenkins had once been forgotten. Now he'd become the keeper of more. And bees. He was the keeper of community, and every buzz, every laugh, every jar of honey passed from hand to hand. That was proof that sometimes it only takes one act of quiet bravery to change everything.